We're up to the left column here on page Gimel in our introduction to Kodshim to Tmura. And now we're talking about Lav She'ein Bo Maisa. Yesh Sovrim She'isur Tmura Hu Lav She'ein Bo Maisa. Now, all our discussions about Malchus, whether you get one set of Malchus or two, they would only reflect the second Shita, that the Torah upgrades the status of Dibur in the case of Tmura to that of a Maisa. But if we go with the other Shita, the first Shita here quoted that Yesh Obrim, that no, the Isur Tmira is only Dibur and it's not Maisa, therefore you don't get Malchus. So all those discussions that we had, is it one Malchus or two Malchus, that's totally irrelevant. Right, to Tmura he Dibur v'lo Maisa. He says the following: even according to that Shita, that Dibur does not equal Maisa. Right, there's some sort of unbroken tradition that probably goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai, which is Torah Shebal Pesha Lokin Alav Zeh. In other words, Tmura gets Malchus according to everyone. The question is, why do you get Malchus? Is it because the Torah recognizes Tmura as a Maisa, or the Torah says that despite the fact that there is no Maisa, you still get Malchus as an exception to the rule? Yesov, according to the second opinion, whenever your Dibur has an impact in this world, it's not just Dibur, speech and talk is cheap, but rather it changes something in this world, then it gets elevated to the status of Dibur Ka'asid Maisa. And now the Kedusha is Chal on the Behemoth Chulin. That's called B'Dibura Ka'avid Maisa, and that's why he gets Malchus. Now I believe that this is a sugya in Malchus. Let's just see. What does he say in Lamed Beis? Unfortunately, I don't have it here because there's a shadow here. Do you have footnote Lamed Beis? It should be on the bottom right. You have such a footnote?
Yeah.
Does he quote a Gemara Malchus? I'm just curious. Maybe I can I just, maybe I'll borrow your page just for a second, because I don't have the original.
I'll give it right back.
Oh, you see, you have much more than I have.
Okay.
I don't have that.
Can't tell if it's Gemara.
Yeah, the Gemara Gimel. Hamid Rav es HaMishnah Shalokin ala Tmura Yishitas HaSover Lav She'ein Bo Maisa Lokino. So wait a minute, this is the third sheet. He doesn't even mention that sheet in the text itself. Lav She'ein Bo Maisa. Kutzmi Nishba Meimer Mekala. Wait a minute, I'm a bit confused. He vacillated as to whether or not this is a Shmipi Ashmur, or it's the Dibur Kavod Maisa. But here he quotes a sheet of Rav that you get Malchus on Tmura because Lav She'ein Bo Maisa Lokino. So I guess that sheet did not have the Mipi Ashmur. They just didn't have that transmission. So we go back to the general rule of Lav She'ein Bo Maisa. If you go to the second sheet, that the Dibura Ka'avid Maisa, then even if I agree with you that there is no Shmur, I don't need a Shmur, because the Dibura Ka'avid Maisa therefore becomes a Lav She'ein Yesh Bo Maisa. If you assume it's a Lav She'ein Bo Maisa, then it becomes one of those three rare, those exceptions to the rule that you get Malchus for Lav She'ein Bo Maisa. That would have to be based on Mipi Ashmur, but there is another view that Lokin Alav She'ein. The Torah does not require the condition of a Maisa in order to give Malchus. Now the rest of it is here on the left, which I have, so I can give this back. Again, we're looking now on the left column on Gimel in the bottom section, which is the notes section. Haresha hamemir nechshav ein bo mais. So Rav says that this is a lav shein bo mais, and either we're reflecting the view that lav shein bo mais loken olav, or if lav shein bo mais ain't loken olav, then we have to base ourselves on him in Piyas Shmuel. Rabbi Yochanan says, Lo tisnei u'meimar, in that list of the three exceptions where you get malchus for lav shein bo mais, take meimar out of the list. The list should be comprised of only two cases, which is shvua and klal, but not meimar. Why? Dibura asa maisa. This is a lav sheyesh bo maisa. So again, we have three possibilities. Either it's a lav shein bo maisa with the b'piyas shvua, or we hold that lokin al lav shein bo maisa, or it's a lav sheyesh bo maisa. Did you see that, Rabbi? I think a more pedagogic way of saying it is to set up two extremes, two polar extremes, and then the compromise sheet in the middle. The two extremes are either that you do get malchus for lav shein bo maisa, or this is a lav sheyesh bo maisa, even though you don't get malchus for lav shein bo maisa. So far, so good. So again, either the rule is loken al lav shein bo maisa, or this is a case of lav sheyesh bo maisa. The middle case, the middle sheet would say, you don't get malchus for lav shein bo maisa. This is a lav she'ein bo maisa, but we have a b'piyas. We go with that middle sheet, then we understand the statement in the Gemara that al kol lotus isha b'torah eno lokal lav she'ein bo maisa, with the exception of three, and one of them is meimar. Ubishita mekubetzes mevur shenechniku bazeh Rav Yochanan. Now, as Rav considers it a lav she'ein bo maisa, and then you have two choices: either you're going to say you get malchus for lav she'ein bo maisa, or you can apply them in piyas shvua. Rabbi Yochanan holds that this isn't lav she'esh bo maisa. Why? Because b'dibura asa maisa. Rambam kosav shmura ein bo maisa. The Rambam is embracing the shita of Rav against Rabbi Yochanan. He does not accept the dibur kavod maisa. Says the Rambam, why do you get malchus if it's a lav shein bo maisa? And we have a rule that lav shein bo maisa ain't lokin. Says the Rambam, Yashmua lamdu shalokin. B'lecha Mishnah. Oh, does that say spirits? That's really strange. Anyway. It's from the fact that the sugya lists meimar together with nishba makal as exceptions to the rule means that this is a lav shein bo maisa. Don't tell me the dibur kavod maisa. L'shita sagamar nechshav lav shein bo maisa v'piyashvu londu shalom. To think, the classic case of the dibura ka'ovid maisa is lo saxon shar. What do I mean? So I have an animal and it's about to eat from the grazing area. Now I can do one or two things to violate this law. I can either muzzle the animal, or I can call to the animal and scare the animal every time it bends its head down to try to eat. If I muzzle the animal, that means I violated the law of b'maisa, and therefore I get malchus. If, on the other hand, I just call to the animal and I scare it every time it wants to eat, that becomes dibura. And if I'm not mistaken, the Gemara says that you get malchus even in that case, because b'diburo ka'ovid maisa. The Rama might hold, leaving the Lechem Mishnah on the side, that the case of Maimer is radically different than muzzling an animal. even if you muzzle the animal b'dibur, you're muzzling the animal. That's just a different way of muzzling the animal. But in the case of Tmura, what are you doing? You're making a declaration, and the animal remains exactly as it is. Nothing changes in the physical world. There's an abstract change of ownership. You know what I mean? It's no longer a behemoth chulin that you own. Now it became a behemoth haggish. So the Rambam might hold that.
That's self-demise.
So I'm saying a maisa is when you change something in the physical universe. You know, the animal moves away from the grains, and instead of eating from the grains, it's virtually, in effect, it's being muzzled. So you change something in the world. You can change something in the world that's physical in one way or another, either by muzzling it in a physical change or b'dibur. So what you're accomplishing b'dibur is exactly identical to what you would have accomplished b'maisa. That to the Rambam is the sugya of lav sheyesh bo maisa. Why? Because b'dibur kavid maisa. His dibur is substituting for a maisa. But in the case of Meimar, the Rambam, that's not b'dibur kavid maisa. Here we're going to accept Rav Rav against Rav Yochanan, and we're going to have to apply the principle of Mipia Shmua. Because again, the Rambam is committed to the position that lav sheyesh bo maisa ain't lokinol. On the other hand, the Rambam refuses to apply the Dibur Kavod Maisa to the case of Meimar. The Rambam therefore has no choice but to accept Rav Shita and assume that the Malchus in Tmur is Mipi Hashmur. All I'm saying is that you don't have to accept the Lechem Mishnah, that the Rambam doesn't have the principle of the Dibur Kavod Maisa. The Rambam might be very open and acceptable to the Dibur Kavod Maisa, just as refusing to apply that to the case of Tmura, where the whole difference is just a legal status as opposed to anything that changes in the physical universe. Now we have another issue about Malchus, because amongst the rules of limiting and restricting Malchus, one of them is lav hanitak liesek. What does that mean? That if the Torah says that if in an event chas v'sholom heaven forbid karamba you violate the lav, here you have to fulfill a tikkun, and you have to do an essay. Like for example, you steal something and the Torah says hashev teshiva, and you have to return the gzela. You don't get malchus for gzela. That's a very strange halacha, by the way. But that's what that I can't, change that. That's engraved in stone. If a person steals, he doesn't get malchus. Right, but I don't. Right now, you think there's a difference in Gnei and Gzela in this context? I don't know. I think in both cases the Torah says you have to.
Was put behind his back.
Correct.
Direction. Gzela's behind.
Gzela is direct and Gnei is stealth.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The Torah said Gnei, and let me have kafel or the back.
And Gzela, you face you don't pay kafel. Yeah. But in both cases, you chayav, I think, I don't know otherwise, to return the object that you stole. So that makes it into a lav hanitak. Let's say you don't get malchus. Very interesting. No malchus, neither in Gneva or in Gzela. So far, so good. Now, what about Tmura? The Torah says that if you are Meimir, then you're now obligated in a mitzvah aseh. You have to now bring the behemas chulin onto the mizbeach. And that's going to throw a monkey wrench into, again, everything we've been discussing until now, namely that you get malchus for violating the law of Tmura. And maybe, even though it's a lav shein bo maisa, but maybe it does have a maisa. Rabbi Yochanan insists it's a b'dibur ka'avid maisa, or maybe we have a special mipi hashmua, or maybe we hold that lav shein bo maisa lokanol. But what about lav hanitak liesek? There's a more fundamental issue here. How can you possibly get malchus? Again, if you're going to go with mipi hashmua, then the mipi hashmua says la maisa, after everything's said and done, you get malchus for Tmura.
What's the saying?
The assay is to bring the behema on the mizbeach. Let's take a look inside. Iser Tmura is a lav hanitak liesek mishum shenemar v'chamer yamir behema vayahu utmuraso yeh kodesh. V'hainu sheme'acher v'chidshet Torah shal yedei ma'isa ha'isur chal chalos kedusha b'veimas chulun areze kemo lav hanitek liyes. He doesn't add what I tried to push for. My agenda said he has to bring the Behemoth Chulin onto his back because now it's been upgraded to the status of Behemoth Hegdish. Okay, so Tosfos is going to disagree, but let's operate now without Tosfos. That's footnote number Lamed Gimel. At this point, Rabbi said we're going to assume that Tmura is called a lava nitakli es. And that's not good news because everything we said until now is premised on the fact that you should get Malchus for Tmura. Again, the fact that it's lo nitak le'eseh will deal with that problem. I'm sorry, the fact that it's a lav shem b'maisa will deal with that problem. And we've dealt with it. We've offered 3 different resolutions to that issue as to why you get malchus for a lav shem b'maisa in the case of Tmura. But now we have a more head-on issue. What about a lav nitak le'eseh? So let's see how we deal with that. Well, if you go with Mipi Ashmura, then Mipi Ashmura says Lamaisi, you get Malchus for Tmura. I don't care what it is. But we have to keep in mind that there was, out of the 3 Shitas, there were 2 other Shitas that didn't operate with Mipi Ashmura. ומכל לוקים עליו זה משום שנאמר באיסור זה שתי לאווים ועשה אחד. This comes back to our original discussion. You remember that we had yesterday. The Torah says, "Lo yachlifenu, v'lo yamiroso," and those are 2 lav. In fact, the first lav might address even an animal that's not yours; it belongs to someone else, and the second one is your own animal, whatever it might be. Again, I don't want to get off on that trend, but there's definitely 2 lavim written in the pasuk. Okay, so what? What does that have to do with anything? Ein essay echad yachol lenatek shnei lav. Steve, does this sound familiar? It's like ein essay tochlos every essay. An essay is called a nituk on a lav, but we're very stingy. We only give out 1 ticket. We can't give you 2 tickets. You know, you bought a ticket for the presentation. You know, for the we'll call it sports, you know, spectacle, but we're not going to sell you 2 tickets. So an essay is granted 1 ticket to be menatek a lot, but an essay could not have the power of 2 tickets to be menatek 2 different lav. I mean, a very technical rule over here. Now, if we go with that Torah Tmima that John was quoting yesterday, that the 2 Isurim of Lo Yachlifenu, 2 Lavim, and Lo Yamirtis are addressing 2 different scenarios, and it's not one single scenario where you violate both Isurim. It's either your animal or it's his animal. So Lamaisi, you could only violate 1 lav at a time. I don't know why you need 2 tickets for the essay to be not take both lavim. I guess we're looking at Tmura as a general concept, and the conceptual framework of Tmura, not Lamaisa, but it involves 2 lavim. You'll never violate both lavim simultaneously because it's an either-or situation. V'gam mishum essay eno kayam v'chol ha'ofanim b'hem over ha'is. Now he's saying a whole different answer, that in order to make it into a lav hanitak li essay, the essay has to have the power to always be menatek the lav. That's not true. Why? Sibur v'shutfim she'miru aim tmurason tmura. Okay, Rabbi say now we're introducing a whole new principle. At least for me, it's new. Maybe you're aware of it. That if you have by the tzibur shutfim, then aim tmurason tmura. When we call makom over it be'is. But here's a case where the essay could not be menatek the lav. You'll violate the lav and finito, the closed book. There's no petach, there's no opening here to allow for a nita. And that's the case of tzibur and shutfim she'imiru. Again, this is very futuristic. I mean, we're not ready for this, but let's accept it as an axiom that tzibur v'shutfim she'imiru ain't tmurasam tmura. I'll tell you what I think it means. Again, this is just I'm shooting from the hip here. This is like, he's saying that if you and I own an animal, then my ownership is no greater than yours, or vice versa. If you go ahead and you're maimir, you don't have the power of tmura because I'm objecting. I say, well, I'm not partner to your, I'm a partner to the ownership, but I'm not a partner to your tmura.
We've got cases where you got precedent home. One wants to shop, one doesn't want to. They can shop, they can do this.
Correct, but that's because shichrur is not a violation of Isur, but you want to take this animal and use it to violate an Isur of tmura. I have a right to object to that. Now, I'm not saying that you didn't do a Maisa Tmura. You own the animal, which is called ownership on the whole animal. So therefore, you're capable of violating the Isur Tmura on your own without me. But on the other hand, to say that now your Maisa Tmura will have an impact, in which case you take this animal which is Hegdesh, and you somehow, contagiously or clone that Kedusha. Right, in cloning, I think you don't change the status of the original, right? In clone, or you do. Right. If you clone something, the original doesn't lose its talent, right? So that's a good example of tmura. So you want to now take this animal and clone its kedusha on another animal. That you can't do, but you violated the Isur Tmura because you did a Maisa Tmura. So now we have a situation where there's no nituk on the lot. So we'll get to tzibur in a minute, but in shutfim, there's no nituk on the lav, and therefore we don't apply the principle of lav nituk lesei. Lav nituk lesei only applies when the koach nituk, the mitzvah that now is menatik the lav, has a 100% application in all cases. It will always be a nituk. If I can come up with one case, like let's say, for example, Reuven steals Shimon's animals. He has to return the animal to Shimon. If you can come up with one case, one scenario where he violates the law, but there's no essay, then it's not a lav anitik lesson. Because it's an all or nothing proposition. Either the essay could be menatik the lav in all cases, or it's not a nituk at all. And if we come up in Tmura with one case where the essay is not menatik the lav, because in the case of Shutfin, when Reuven is Maimir the animal, the other animal, Bevis Fluid, does not gain the status, not even half the status of Hegdish, 0. Then there's no essay to be menatik the law. Now he has a case of Tzibur. I think Tzibur might be a different halachik. It's not the same as Shutfin. I think in the case of tzibur, there's no possibility of doing tmura because the Torah prohibits tmura, and how could the tzibur violate that? If let's say you have a list of the tzibur, you've got 1 million names on the list. Basically, each individual can endorse the tmura, if you follow what I mean, but not as a tzibur. It's just a collection of individuals. Anyway, bottom line, there's no essay to be menatek in these two scenarios, and therefore Tmura is not a lavanitik list. The first answer was that there are two lav, and you cannot have one nituk on two lav. See, I don't know how to buy into that, honestly, because in Geneva and Ksela, you can violate many lav. Like, I'll give you an example. You familiar with the concept called Oshek? So Oshek means that I obligated myself to pay the laborers a wage. And the Torah says if I don't pay those wages and I deny the laborers their wages, I violate a lav d'oraisa l'sasha. So the Gemara in Bava Metzia asks the following question. I very rarely remember the page, but in this case I remember which page it's on. And the Gemara asks, what are you talking about? Why did the Torah have to give you the lav of Oshek? If he doesn't pay his wages, that's Zela. So the Gemara answers, lav are all of the Shnei lav. He violates two lav. Wait, let me just think, where was I taking? I was on my way somewhere, but I forgot where I was going. That the nituk, we just finished saying that you cannot be menatek two lav. Because the nituk only has power for one lav. There can't be menatek two lav. But we know that in Zela, you don't get malchus because the lav and nituk lasting, but there are two lav. I don't know. That's how I have trouble with the first answer. The second answer is that if I can show you a scenario in which there's no nituk, there's no essay, because the Tmura did not generate Kedusha on the Behemoth's Chulin, then it's not a lavanituk. And those are the cases of Shufim and Sivu. But Tosfos has a whole different sheet. Take a look at Lamed Gimel. This is much more exciting. Tosfos, he says, listen to this. There are two levels of nituk. There's a knapper nituk, and then there's the real, genuine, full-fledged nituk. This is really fundamental. He's saying that what is nituk? Nituk means you stole something, bring it back and return it. So one Maisa rectifies the other Maisa. You did a Maisa Avera of Zela, now you did a Maisa mitzvah of Hashavas HaGzela. I don't know if it makes a bracha on that mitzvah, but anyway, I don't know if he has to go to mikvah before he does it, but it is a mitzvah. The Torah commands you to return. That's already a nituk b'maisa. But here what happens, you do a Tmura, and the Behemoth's Chula becomes Behemoth's Kodesh. What Maisa are you doing now to rectify your Isa? So I thought it means that you're obligated to bring the Chulin, now that it's Kodesh, onto the Mizbeach. That's a Maisa. Tosfos doesn't hold like that. Tosfos holds that the nituk here could only be the fact that it's Kodesh. Okay, it's Kodesh. But you didn't do a nituk al yedei Maisa. In philosophical terms, I think what we're saying here, according to Tosfos, is that there's a process of rectification. Just like a person does tshuva, in the case of Lava Nita Klese, he has the option of, in quotation marks, doing tshuva by being menatek the lav. But menatek lav requires an action that undermines the lav. It's A, now it's not A. It was stolen and you brought it to your rishus, now you bring it back to the original owner's rishus. I'll give you another example of a lavanitik list. On Pesach, if you own chametz, you violate two lavim of Bal Yirah Bayimot. Oh, this is going to be a problem, actually. It's that an essay can have not two lavim. Okay, anyway. So let's say I violate Bal Yirah Bayimot, so two lavim in the Torah. I don't get malchus for that. Imagine you violate 2 lavim by owning chametz on Pesach, you don't get malchus. Why? Because the Torah says tashbisu, and the Torah commands you to destroy the chametz. Also is going to say that's a lot lesson because there's an essay, bekuvase, an active essay that rectifies the lotus. You own the chametz and now you destroyed the chametz. That's a lava lesson. But Tamura, what happens over here? It became kodesh. But what did you do? You did nothing. You didn't lift a finger. All you did was this avera of a maisa Tamura. That's not a lava lesson. So basically, we have a 3-pronged answer to the question of why you get malchus for Tmura, l'chora, it's a lava lesson. One answer is that there are 2 lavim, and an essay cannot be menatek 2 lavim. We have a lot of problems. Second answer is that it cannot qualify as a lav hanitek l'essay because there are scenarios, there are situations in which you cannot be menatek the lav. And that is shutfim and tzibur. And the third answer is that lav hanitek l'essay, you require a nituk with an essay bekum v'asay, and that doesn't apply to it. Okay, then we'll stop here. We'll open up the Gemara. So let's just make a note of where we got up to here for Wednesday. I'll write down. And we're up to Gimel. Okay, that's progress.